Story 44, wife's boss refers to her as his work wife. I, 57 male, and my wife Jennifer, 56 female, met decades ago and married after just 1 year of dating. This was Jennifer's second marriage and my first. Since we had a short run-up to the wedding, Jennifer offered a prenup that would restrict any alimony and child support if we split up and children were involved. She made significantly more. I said sure unless there was provable infidelity. Then, the cheater would give up all rights to any home or property we jointly owned. We went back and forth a couple of times and came up with a document we could both agree to, but Jennifer seemed to want just a basic 50-50 split of everything without alimony or child support. She made significantly more than I did, as she was well into her career, and I was getting out of the military when we met. She said the infidelity clause wasn't needed unless I was planning to cheat on her. I just laughed at that. The concept of a prenup never bothered me because I believe a law should be passed forcing couples to have one before getting married. It would unburden the court system and save taxpayers huge amounts of money. That would make people think twice before doing stupid stuff in their relationships. When we married, and I was separated from the Air Force, I returned to school and worked full-time, taking a government service job doing exactly what I did in the Air Force for 3 times the money. I busted my butt getting through school for electrical engineering in parallel. The great part about G's jobs is that they encourage you to go for training. It was the next step for me to advance my career. I stayed in that job until landing a nice job in aerospace. As my career advanced, Jennifer's income peaked about the time we got married. I took only a few years in the aerospace industry to overtake my wife's income. We lived comfortably since Jennifer was in an executive role at her company, and I excelled in my job. As the years passed, we regularly sold and purchased newer, nicer homes in more upscale areas. We lived an amazing life, being able to do whatever we wanted. We discovered early in our marriage that Jennifer had a defect in her uterus that caused her to be infertile. No big deal, both of us were very happy in our jobs and marriage. Jennifer and I shared the travel bug, vacationing everywhere, which interested us. We loved cruises because of the pampering and concept that your hotel goes with you. We had quite a few friends from both my side of work/life and hers. Jennifer's senior executive leader changed about 5 years ago, so she had to learn to work with a new boss. They seemed to gel well and had a lot of similar ideas on how to push the company forward. About a year ago, Jennifer would talk about work like ordinary people, but she made a strange offhand comment that the CEO had called her his work wife since they spent so much time together at work. She was laughing about it until she noticed I wasn't. We were at home having dinner, and I could tell she knew I was not amused. A little while later, she brought up the fact I didn't seem to be happy and asked what was wrong. I remember putting my fork down and looking at her, waiting for her to connect to why I was upset. She again asked me, what? So I simply told her that anyone referring to her as a spouse was crossing the line. I told her that it inferred there was an inappropriate closer relationship. She waved it off, saying it was just a saying. I said, no. It is not. I told her it was inappropriate and asked her what she would think if I told her I had developed a relationship with another woman where we were referring to each other as wife/husband. She pursed her lips and said she could understand but assured me it wasn't inappropriate. Her easy dismissal of my feelings annoyed me to the point that I drew a line in the sand, so to speak. I told Jennifer again that it was inappropriate. Then I told her that if I ever heard of her referring to someone else as any variation of husband, she'd be free to pursue it. I know that many of you reading this probably don't agree with me, and that's fine, but there are boundaries on the relationship between a husband and wife that cannot be blurred without consequences. I believe that blurring those lines is a huge part of the cheating epidemic in our society. We need to be more responsible with our own actions. I told Jennifer that she needed to ensure that CEO Bob understood I had a problem with him referring to my wife in such a familiar way. Jennifer finally started to recognize that I was completely serious about this. She told me that although she didn't agree, she would ask Bob not to make that reference. We sat there finishing our meal in silence, and I got up, cleaned my dishes, and went outside for a walk to clear my head. Jennifer was extra attentive for a few days, until I could get past the conversation. A few months later, we went to her company holiday party. During the festivities, there was a celebration of how the company's finances performed during the year. There were somewhere near 200 employees, and their spouses at the party, and everyone was standing in a crowd as the CEO Bob called up the executive team to recognize them for their hard work. As CEO Bob got to Jennifer, he put his arm around her shoulders, looked in my direction, and commented about them working so closely together that they had started calling each other work wife and husband. There was a nervous, forced laugh in the crowd, And Jennifer's head snapped in my direction to look at me, going white as a sheet. She stepped away from Bob and shook his arm off, excusing herself. CEO Bob looked at her in confusion and asked her where she was going, saying he wasn't done. Jennifer snapped back at him and said that she'd asked him not to say that. She started cutting through the crowd toward me, but I had returned to our table to pick up my stuff. I was livid at CEO Bob's remarks and actions. Jennifer started calling my name as she tried to catch up with me. What was happening was evident, and everyone stared between me, Jennifer, and CEO Bob. I got to the table, grabbed my jacket, wallet, phone, and keys, and walked out of the building with Jennifer hot on my heels. I ignored her calls for me to stop and walk to my car. We had taken separate vehicles to the party since Jennifer needed to be there early. I got in my car as Jennifer caught up with me. She was begging me to stop and talk to her. I rolled down the window as she slapped the glass, pleading for me to open the door. She repeatedly apologized to me and claimed she had told CEO Bob not to say that anymore. Once she stopped talking, I noticed the tears on her cheeks. I asked her, "Have you ever called CEO Bob your work husband to anyone?" Jennifer started shaking violently and said not since we talked about it. I drove off, leaving her there crying in the parking lot. Jennifer made it home about 15 minutes after I did. I assumed she had to return and get her stuff and deal with any fallout with CEO Bob. I grabbed my bag and threw in enough clothes for a week during those 15 minutes. Jennifer entered the door as I walked out of the bedroom with my bag. She ran to me and grabbed me, wrapping her arms around me and asking me not to leave. I told her that I needed some time away from her because I was so angry that I didn't want to talk until I could calm down and get my head sorted out. I pulled away from her and left the house. She was standing on the porch crying, dancing in circles, and screaming as I drove away. I wasn't kidding about her calling someone her husband, which was a deal breaker for me. D-Day was on a Friday, so I couldn't see a lawyer until Monday at the earliest. I took a copy of our prenup to the meeting so the lawyer could review it. He said that the document was in my favor in this situation, but I could tell he was a little confused by my being so adamant regarding the comments that triggered this. He said that if I wanted to trigger the infidelity clause, I'd need more than the comment. They accepted the work and said they'd start working on the divorce paperwork. I made another appointment a few days later to bring in all the supporting docs for bank accounts, assets, etc. After some thought, I decided to talk to Jennifer and see how far this relationship had developed. I went home that afternoon and found that Jennifer was already there. As it turned out, her company's HR department called her in that morning to ask about the comment she made to CEO Bob. They cited that she brushed his arm off and yelled at him not to call her that anymore. Jennifer spent the morning working through that with HR and was sent home after becoming emotional during the conversation. For Jennifer, when I entered the house, she looked up from where she sat at the breakfast table with her laptop open. She got up and came to me, asking again for forgiveness. I stopped her and asked how far the relationship went, telling her I had already spoken to a lawyer. Our future would be decided by just how close she and CEO Bob had become. She immediately launches into the song and dance that they didn't have any inappropriate relationship and were merely work acquaintances who had grown close enough to joke around. I looked at her and held out my hand. She looked at it and started to reach out with hers until I said, "Phone." Her eyes darted to her phone on the table, and I could tell there was a hesitation. I told her, "If you don't give me your phone right now, I will divorce you." She was nervous but pointed to it and said okay. I picked up the phone and tried her normal password, and it didn't work. I looked at her, and she said sorry, that she had changed it because someone at work had seen her unlock it. She held out her hand, and I told her, "No, tell me the password." She hesitated again but told me the new password as I was putting the phone down again. I opened her phone and didn't have to go further than text messages. The messages between her and Bob were mostly work-related, but numerous messages from Bob to her were not work-related. Nothing nasty, but many said he missed her and looked forward to seeing her the next week or commenting on how good she looked in certain clothes. Jennifer didn't say anything back other than, "Thank you," or "See you on Monday," etc. Although it didn't look like Jennifer had reciprocated the affection openly, she hadn't said anything to dissuade him from making those comments. As she stood there watching, she started to shake, and she had to sit down. She watched as I took screenshots of the conversations and sent them to myself. She apologized again and said she should have told him to stop, but she didn't want to upset him because work was going so well. I returned her phone and told her I wanted to look through her work computer's company chat. She objected, saying she wasn't supposed to allow even me to look at that since it was the company's property. I told her that either she allowed me to look at it or I would leave. This was my last request. She was crying and opened her Slack for me, going to CEO Bob's chat thread. I briefly looked at it but closed it, went to the computer desktop, and started looking for chat apps. She had one installed, and I opened it. There was only one person on it as a friend, CEO Bob. Jennifer dropped to the floor, sobbing as I read through their exchanges. There was a lot more intimate conversation with Bob openly saying he loved her, and she returned comments to him saying she missed being next to him at work, etc. I looked through it, and it appears it had been going on for at least a year. Nothing suggested that they'd consummated the relationship, but more than enough to show that they were in an emotional relationship. I found a few comments about their home lives, and Jennifer always told Bob that she loved me and was conflicted about their budding relationship. She told him of her guilt for even being as close to him as they were. Then I finally found a comment where CEO Bob propositioned her, saying they could take a business trip and stretch it out into a mini vacation where they could see how their relationship evolved. It was obvious Bob was propositioning her for a cheater's getaway. I took a picture of that. I took pictures of most of it but found it easier to record a video and scroll through the messages for reference later. I got up and looked at Jennifer. She was still sobbing on the floor, looking pathetic. I expected myself to be way angrier than I was. I was in this zone of action that didn't allow me to feel too much. That didn't last long, as I fell apart when I got into my car. Jennifer had followed me out to the car, screaming and crying for forgiveness, and something broke in me emotionally. I must have just sobbed in my car for a half hour until I could control my emotions again. Jennifer had stood at the door, freaking out that I was crying. I had never cried in front of her before, even when my mom had passed away a couple of years earlier. Well, someone called the cops because a patrol car pulled up to our house, and sheriff's deputy came over to ask us what was going on. I was sitting in the car with my eyes closed when he knocked on the window. I exited the car to de-escalate the situation and told him the truth in front of Jennifer. A few neighbors were outside watching, guessing one of them called the cops. Jennifer was standing there with her face in her hands with her shoulders convulsing but no longer crying loud enough to hear. The sheriff told me he was sorry to hear about what I found. He asked Jennifer if she was okay, and she nodded. He asked her if what I said accurately described what was happening, and she nodded again. He told her to go back inside. He asked me if I was staying at the house tonight, and I said no. He said that would be a good idea. He left a few minutes later after advising me on handling the rest of the evening and our interactions going forward. Basic stuff to ensure I didn't get into a situation like a TRO. I left, drove away, and didn't see Jennifer again until our lawyers met. I had her served at work in front of everyone in the office. I also had the lawyers serve CEO Bob with a TRO since he was stupid enough to contact me a few times, once leaving a nasty voicemail saying he should kick my ass for causing so much trouble. I sent a copy of their inappropriate chats to the HR department and followed that up with his voicemail threat. CEO Bob did have to answer to the board, and HR was required to provide any legal documents or HR complaints to them. Since HR had already provided the board with the HR violation, CEO Bob was invited to explore opportunities outside the company. Jennifer was given the opportunity to retire from the company with full vesting of her options and pension, which she took. Basically, buying her out since CEO Bob was her superior, and he was pushing for the relationship. I, on the other hand, got everything outlined in our prenup. Our divorce was finalized in October of 2018.
I only post new and unique content. Please like and subscribe.